Greetings and welcome to the 42nd episode of Morrowind's Modding Showcases. As always, I'm your host, Dark Elf Guy, and first of all, I really need to apologise for how delayed this episode ended up being. A lot of that had to do with the theme. I originally thought it might be fun to do a Final Fantasy themed episode, but as it turns out, I couldn't quite find enough mods for that, so I changed it to a video games theme. And as a result, this episode probably isn't the sort of high quality you guys have come to expect from Morrowind's Modding Showcases, and I do apologise for that. After taking more than 6 weeks to work on this episode, I just had to get it released so we could move on to other mods and categories. Needless to say, many of these mods are not exactly lore friendly, but at the same time there's a fair number that blend in pretty well with the original game, so just keep that in mind. And while this is a video games themed episode, there's still a few mods that don't exactly match with the theme, and there's also a ton of old-time classics. So with that said, as always, you can find download links for each mod shown down in the video description below. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the popular mod of the week, which this week is Mog Mod by Ian McConville. And this is a kind of an older mod, but certainly a classic that adds the Moogle race from Final Fantasy to Morrowind that you can choose to play as, and really, to my mind, this is one of the more detailed race mods made for Morrowind. You can select from dozens of different face and head options, including such things as the colour of the little light above your character's head and the status of your eyes, where you can choose to play as a character who constantly has their eyes closed, or always seems to be half asleep, just like in Japanese anime. And here you can see the Moogle model up close, and a rather cool feature is that the wings these Moogles have actually move, flapping up and down, and there's a bunch of other minor details like the ears, which do little ticks now and then, and really you just gotta appreciate the quality of these models, particularly given that this mod was released over a decade ago in, I believe, 2004. And here you can see the full body, and you'll notice there's bits of fluffy fur poking out here and there, sort of a more furry version of the Moogle race, though the Final Fantasy series keeps changing what Moogles look like every other iteration, it seems, and as you might expect, the Moogles are a beast race, so that means you won't be able to wear boots. But they do have some pretty cool looking feet and paws, and again, I just have to say, these are some really well done race models, though I believe they're limited to only males. Female Moogles are not included. Now, a really interesting feature of the Moogle race is that because of their wings, they have a really high starting acrobatic skill and can jump high into the sky, as you can see here, and this is particularly useful for reaching high places at an early level. And just to show off a few different variations of Moogles, here you can see one with a different face and hair option. This little fellow has sort of wide open, shocked looking eyes, and a halo hovering above him, which is certainly a pretty cool style in my estimation. Now, a fun fact, though somewhat off topic, is that back in the day, Ian McConville ran a webcomic called Mac Hall, one of dozens of webcomics from the turn of the century, and while it's no longer being updated, you can still find some of Ian McConville's Morrowind webcomics on there, and I've included a link to the website down in the video description below. And anyway, sort of the last thing I want to show off here is the cool lighting effects that come with each Moogle, especially noticeable during the evening and nighttime hours. And I just sort of think that this is a neat little detail that's fun to play around with. For our house mod of the week this week, we have Japanese House Mod by Sniper Daria, and once again, this is a fairly old but extremely popular house mod from the early 2000s, and if I'm remembering correctly, it even won entry into the Planet Elder Scrolls Hall of Fame. And as the name would suggest, it's a Japanese-styled house that sits on a small island near Vivek, with a lot of cool Japanese-looking details, like cherry blossom trees, a little rock garden and pond, and also a tiny shrine located off the main house here. And here you can see the inside of that shrine I just mentioned, and it's just a really small interior, but it has a lot of cool features that work pretty well with the Dunleary aesthetic. And it also doubles as a training room with a working practice dummy that you can just sort of wail on in order to improve your combat skills. And here you can see the main house with more of that Japanese style, including oriental chests, a samurai mannequin in full armor as you can see here, some lovely wall paintings, and of course the floors are covered in, I believe they're called tatami mats. And really this is a very cool, if also very small house mod with a lot of really nice details, like a hidden away sleeping area with a futon, and a nice cooking and dining area that's just very characteristic of the Japanese style, as you can just sort of see here. This week's gameplay mod of the week is Genova's Children by Rin, and this is yet another Final Fantasy based race mod, adding the Genova race from Final Fantasy VII Advent Children that you can select as a playable race as soon as you get off the boat and see the Neen. And as you can see here, there's a wide array of face, head, and hair types for both male and female Genova, and there's some really cool options here regarding eye and hair color especially, as well as some neat facial tattoos that can be selected, and a number of other features based on, I believe, the Breton race. And this is another sort of older mod from the mid-2000s, and another Hall of Fame winner from the Planet Elder Scrolls days, and really it's probably just as popular as the Mog mod if I'm being totally honest here. But in any event, the Genova are sort of a short race, kind of like the Bosmer, or male Bosmer at least, and you can see one of the male Genova characters here, and I have to say, they are a really cool looking race, and at the risk of overusing this word, they are rather stylistic looking with some really cool hair types. They are basically a better bodies type race, nothing too out of the ordinary here, pretty much what you'd expect, and here's a female Genova character. Again, you gotta notice the stylish hair and the rather piercing and very distinct eyes. And another thing you'll notice is that from the NPCs moving around here in Cidanine, the Genova are a very short race. The female and males are about the same height, but they're still quite small compared to most of Tamriel's native races, and actually they might be just a slight bit shorter than the Bosmer. Finally, I just want to take one additional look at one of the male Genova characters that you can see here, and this fellow is quite striking with red hair, almost evil looking red eyes, and a scar on his face, and all in all, the Genova race is just one very cool looking race mod, and I do recommend it if you like playing stylistic like characters or particularly enjoy Final Fantasy. Next up is our Dungeon Mod of the Week, and this week we have Alien Remnants by JMK. And essentially what this mod does is add new alien ruins, like what you'll find in Oblivion, across the island of Solstein, and for the most part, you'll find them scattered around Solstein's western coast, and you can typically tell them from a pretty good distance from the iconic arch-like white towers, as seen here. And along with these new alien ruins, you'll now discover a new archaeological society on Solstein dedicated to exploring and investigating these ancient structures, and you'll naturally find their headquarters holed up in one of these numerous ruins. As you might expect, their headquarters offer a fair number of services, as well as some classic Aeolid furniture and wall pieces, and it appears that JMK has created most of this from scratch rather than using the Aeolid resources found in other mods like, for example, Province Cyrodiil. And much like JMK's other mods, many of these NPCs will offer various quests for you to do, and they also mostly have unique dialogue, which is always a plus in my book. You'll also find some new quests out in the wilderness, which typically involve helping NPCs clear out certain alien ruins that you'll encounter along Solstein's frigid coastline. Now, something you might notice is that the interiors for these alien dungeons appear to be largely based off of the Mournhold Sewer set, so they're not really quite identical to the dungeons you'll find in, for example, Oblivion, but they do still provide a good variety for the Solstein environment, and often contain numerous enemies and deadly traps for you to avoid. And really, it should be said that some of these dungeons can be really quite large, and overall this mod provides a ton of content for you to explore, easily about 6 to 7 hours worth in total, if I'd have to give a rough estimation, though obviously that'll vary between player to player, since obviously some people explore more than others. And just like in Oblivion, these dungeons have a lot of deadly traps, like, for example, swinging axes, or also shock traps, which might just be unique to this mod actually. I don't really remember them in Oblivion, but anyway, point is, you'll have to be on your toes in these dungeons, unlike, for example, Vanilla Morrowind. And another cool feature of this mod is that it also adds a new island off the coast of Solstein, dominated by Aeolid ruins, and also an Aeolid well here that gives you some nice, if temporary, status effects. And there's yet another quest here as well, and really there are quite a large number of quests in this mod. And all in all, if you enjoy the Aeolid ruins from Oblivion, you'll find a lot to like here, and this makes for a pretty good and seamless addition to the island of Solstein as well. For this week's Items Mod of the Week, we have Weapons of Final Fantasy VII by Lord Nuke. And basically what this mod does is it adds a Final Fantasy weapon stand here in Balmora, with a wide array of naturally Final Fantasy based weapons and items that you can buy from this odd looking gentleman here. And there's a bit of new dialogue here, and needless to say, this mod isn't for purists, as there's really very little about it that's lore-friendly in any way, shape, or form. And here you can see one of the new weapons, a one-handed blade that my Moogle character is wielding. And it isn't exactly very high resolution, and here's another one, and this one looks like some sort of energy blade, but I confess I don't really know my Final Fantasy weapons very well. And here's another energy blade thingy. I can only assume this is one of the weapons that a Final Fantasy character wields in the series. And here's another weapon that's a bit strange looking, and I'm not even really sure how this is a practical combat weapon, to be honest. And here you can see a number of the weapons laid on these tables here, including some more recognizable and iconic Final Fantasy weapons, such as Cloud's Buster Sword, amongst others, and you might notice these are really just very low resolution weapons. Keep in mind this model was made in the early 2000s. Moving on, next up is our quest mod of the week, and this week we have Castlevania Dark Sanctuary by the Darkman, Xenothrope, and Modman. And basically what this mod does is it adds a new quest of sorts based on the Castlevania series of games, but with Elder Scrolls gameplay where you can visit a new mysterious island that's popped up off the coast of the Bitter Coast. And it's a tall mountainous island indeed, with a long and extensive network of stairs that go around the base of the mountain, and are occupied by a virtual legion of the undead that you'll have to fight through in order to get to the castle at the very top. Unless of course you just levitate to the top, which is always an option, since this is Morrowind after all. And here you can see the Castlevania castle in all of its glory, and it is quite a menacing looking castle indeed, with numerous towers, guard houses, and some really interesting architectural designs and combinations. It really is quite an impressive looking castle with a commanding and dominating perch atop this mountainous island, and for the most part it kind of acts as one big dungeon, as you might expect from a Castlevania based mod, since the Castlevania series of games are very much dungeon related. The castle, much like the outside, is completely full of undead blocking your way forward, and really there's an awful lot of combat involved in this mod, though again that's to be expected with Castlevania and all that. The interior of the castle is a maze of corridors, skeletons, axe masters, ghosts, zombies, and all sorts of other unpleasant stuff, not to mention the occasional deadly trap. And this is one castle where you need to watch your step before moving forward. There's also a number of boss fights, again to be expected, with high-level creatures that you'll have to kill for their demon spears, I believe is what they're called, a collectible item found in this Castlevania mod. And naturally, you'll find rooms full of vampires from the various vampire clans of Vvardenfell, which have been semi-united by the owner of this Castlevania castle into a single fighting force. And you'll be in for really a lot of tough fights in this mod, and according to the readme file, you should actually be at around level 20 before starting the mod for the best chance of survival, and in any event, this is one fairly detailed and unique Castlevania based mod that does a pretty good job of recreating the Castlevania experience in Morrowind, and certainly is worth checking out if you're into that kind of thing. Next up is our Landmass Mod of the week, and this week we have Inner Sea Woods by Yaley. And the Inner Sea Woods is a very different kind of landmass mod. It isn't really so much a landmass exactly as it is a sort of a submerged part of the inner sea of shallow waters, towering trees, and half-built walkways that can take you from Vvardenfell to the mainland of Morrowind. And it should probably be mentioned that the Inner Sea Woods does require Tamari Built to be installed, and in particular the alpha version of Tamari Built. And there are a few small, almost submerged islands in the Inner Sea Woods region, but for the most part, the main traversable area is by these numerous walkways that branch out, join together, and then suddenly disappear in soggy dead ends. And these will take you to many of the landmarks in this territory, such as the occasional sunken ship, half-submerged Velothian Tower, or Siltstrider colony out in these murky waters. And really, this isn't a landmass with a large population or anything like that. You won't even find very many hostile creatures out here. I don't even think you'll see a cliff racer so much as hovering the skies, which is certainly a good thing in my book, but in any event, this is more of an atmospheric landmass edition that tries to join Vvardenfell with the mainland, going from the Bitter Coast region to the northern Ascadia coast of Tamari Built's Morrowind mainland. And in any event though, this is certainly a unique and a one-of-a-kind landmass mod that's certainly worth checking out if you're in the market for an atmospheric and immersive way to get to the mainland from Vvardenfell without having to take a ship or Siltstrider. For our NPC Mod of the Week this week, we have Moglets, or Mini Moogles by Marbrid. And basically what this mod does is it basically adds a variety of mini Moogles to the leveled list of Vvardenfell. You can find these little guys in all sorts of environments, and they're typically unique to a particular environment. Like for example, There's Daedric Moogles that can be found only in Daedric Ruins, and they're equipped in miniature Daedric armor, as you might expect, and pack some fairly powerful lightning shock attacks. And something you might notice here is that these Moogles look vastly different from the Moogles we saw in the popular mod of the month, the Mog mod by Ian McConville, and the reason for that is again that the Final Fantasy universe just changes the Moogle style every few iterations, it seems. And there's also Undead and Corpus Moogles, which can only be found in tombs or possibly in the Ashlands or near Red Mountain. And as you would expect, each variety of Moogle is unique with particular details that identify them. You'll even find Sand Moogles in certain regions, and really, this mod is just a nice addition for adding yet another sort of cute-looking creature to the wilderness that wants nothing more than to kill and maim you to some degree. This week's new Meshes and Textures mod of the week is Techno Industrial Dwemer Retexture by DJ Gamer. And I know this mod doesn't exactly fit with our theme this week, since our theme is sort of video games outside of Morrowind, and as far as I know this mod wasn't really influenced by any other video games outside of the Elder Scrolls series, but it's such a unique and probably not very lore-friendly mod that I thought it might be fun to include with this episode. And basically what it does is it completely retextures all things Dwemer in a sort of noir, techno-industrial vibe. Now you'll be able to see Dwemer ruins in the distance, not because of their towers, but because of the way they light up the sky with neon lights and multiple colors, which really make Dwemer ruins feel like alien cities, even more so than they did in vanilla Morrowind, and they're especially noticeable at night time, with these neon lights creating this very striking effect against the night sky. And going back to daytime, you can see one of the major Dwemer ruins outside of Dagenfell right here. And in any event, it's certainly a very unique and characteristic texture replacer that really does put a mark on the world, and it also covers interior textures with cool neon lights for door handles and more traditional rusty looking industrial textures for many of the corridors and passageways in Dwemer Ruins. Something else that this mod does is it retextures and replaces the Dwemer Centurions that you'll find in Dwemer Ruins to better match their surroundings, like the Centurion Spider, which is the same sort of industrial rust color as the corridors, and Dwemer Spear Centurions, which are now sort of like some strange cyborg-like ball of industrial metals. And also Steam Centurions have been given a facelift with a handful of neon glowing parts, and that large red spiked mace ball thingy they attack people with, adding a bit of color and variation to the enemies you'll face in these Dwemer Ruins. Next up we have our Modder's Resource mod of the week, and this week we have Autoclock's Doom Train Resource by Autoclock. And once again, this mod doesn't exactly match our theme of being influenced by video games outside of Morrowind, but given all of the mods we've shown in this episode, I think it fits right in. Basically, this is a modder's resource for a beautiful looking and somewhat intimidating Dwemer train that you could use in your own mods for practical purposes, like creating a Dwemer railway system, or you could try to recreate the opening scene of Final Fantasy VII. I admit I've never actually played that game, but I do know that the opening scene involves a train of some sort. You could also just, make a Doom train, taking a cue from Trainwiz, and torment the citizens of Vardenfell with their imminent deaths at the hands of the train gods, or you could just throw a train down in the middle of Balmora, whatever floats your boat. But there's certainly plenty of possibilities for what you could use this resource for, if you so desire. For our underrated mod of the week this week, we have Skyrim-style player tasks by Zindra Voken. And as the name of this mod would suggest, it adds in new player tasks that you can partake in to earn a little extra money on the side, similar to the odd jobs you can do in Skyrim, and you can use fishing stools, for example, to catch fish, such as slaughterfish and small slaughterfish, and these will actually end up in your inventory, as you can see here, and you could choose to keep them as trophies, I suppose. They might look good on a mantelpiece, for example. But you can also choose to sell these fish to special traveling fish buyers that you might encounter on the road or in a coastal city, and they'll offer you the highest amount of gold for the fish you've collected, like say 5 to 10 gold per fish, depending on what type of fish you're selling. And just like with fishing, you might also find tree stumps on the edge of some towns, where you can gather firewood using a special woodcutting axe. And each of these activities, it should be mentioned, will take about 1 in-game hour, and afterwards the firewood will appear in your inventory, as you can see here. And of course, just like with the fish, there's special firewood merchants in various towns across Vardenfell, like here in Balmora, that'll offer you the most gold in exchange for these otherwise useless logs. And finally, this mod also adds the option of doing work on the various farms that you'll find around Vardenfell, especially in the Ascadian Isles region, picking ingredients and produce and selling it to the farmer for a slightly above market value rate. There's about a half dozen ingredients that this works with, and it just adds another way for you to make money in Morrowind, much like in Skyrim. This week's Blast from the Past mod of the week is Night Elves by Hyperion, and essentially what this mod does is it adds in a new race to the game that you can choose to play as called Night Elves, and these are obviously based on the quite popular race from World of Warcraft, with elves with a rather colourful set of hair and face options. There's everything from pink to green to blue hair that you can choose from, and much like in World of Warcraft, these elves have purple, almost pink-like skin, and glowing multicoloured eyes. Many of the hairstyle and face options you can choose from are pretty similar to what you can find in vanilla World of Warcraft, at least before all the expansions. I have to confess that I haven't actually played World of Warcraft since about the Burning Crusade expansion, so I'm not really completely up to date on all that. But in any event, not only is this a player race mod, but there's also a ton of new Night Elf related items in terms of armor and weapons that's been included. In Balmora, you'll find that Meldor's shop has been converted into a Night Elf armory, including a Night Elf sentinel guarding the door outside wearing traditional, scantily clad Night Elf armor, which has never seemed all that particularly practical to me. But anyway, the interior of this shop has been given a slight makeover, with numerous Night Elf tapestries adorning the walls, and Meldor himself has been converted into a Night Elf, along with the Halalu god that used to be in here. Here you can also buy all of the newly added items, so naturally they'll set you back a fair amount, and it should be noted that the armor here is for females only, though a male character can wear it, it just looks really unsettling. And regardless, you can see my Night Elf character here wielding one of the new weapons that's been added, a Crescent Blade. And overall, while the character models are a tad bit out of date, keeping in mind that this mod was released in 2005, I think the Night Elves fit in fairly well with modern day Morrowind, even if they are a bit lore-breaking. And here you can see a female Night Elf character wearing the traditional and completely absurd Night Elf armor, which I believe is light armor, and generally speaking, Night Elves have fairly good racial attributes for mages and thieves. You can also see the Night Elf bow in use here, and a fairly cool looking weapon, I have to say. I also want to point out that the Night Elf eyes do tend to glow a little bit, especially noticeable in the evening hours, as you can sort of see here. And lastly, I wanted to show off another male Night Elf character, this one with the face of one of the main characters from Warcraft 3. I can't quite remember his name, it started with the letter I, if I'm recalling correctly. He was a dual wielder of Crescent Blades. I think he was even a dungeon boss in one of the World of Warcraft expansions, but regardless, it's a face option you can choose, and you can also see another one of the Night Elf traditional weapons here, throwable glaives. So there's a fair variety of traditional Night Elf weapons to choose from. And finally, for our bonus mod of the week this week, we have Welkin Stones by Peter Bitt, and this is a fairly simple mod. While out exploring one of the 6 house bases, you might stumble upon the corpse of some poor adventurer sitting next to a Welkin Stone. And there's a bit of a story behind what happened to this poor soul, and an explanation for the Welkin Stone so far away from an Aeweird ruin. And much like in Oblivion, you can use this Welkin Stone to restore your magicka if you so desire. Of course, given its rather unique and rare nature, and the fact that it just looks really cool, you might choose to keep it as a trophy instead. And anyway, that pretty much wraps up everything I have for you guys today, and again, I just want to apologize both for the massive delay in getting this episode out there, and the overall quality of this video. I shall endeavor to get the next episode out in a more timely manner, with a hopefully more consistent theme. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you did enjoy this video, do feel free to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time with another 13 mods for your viewing pleasure.